as you say, 1991 was a very big change. But I want to clarify one thing. You gave the impression that at the time there was huge resistance within the bureaucracy, and that everybody was locked onto an old-fashioned mindset. This is not actually true. I mean, for several years before 1990, in the what you might call the administrative, come technocratic level in government, there was an awareness that we needed to change. I mean, after all, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, way back in 1985 in Parliament, had said that, look, we cannot compete with other countries if we are locked into systems that are 20 years out of date. So the notion that systems had to change was very much there. We were aware of what was happening in the world. I mean, remember, the 1980s has seen changes everywhere. And towards the end of the 1980s, East European communist countries more or less gave up communism. The Soviet Union did not do that. They did that only towards the end of 1991. We knew that China had made tremendous changes, which could be broadly seen as moving towards a more market economy. So people were aware that things were happening. The truth is that very distinguished Indian economists, I mean, Jagdish Bhagwati, T.N. Srinivasan, many others had actually said, look, we need to change, and we had not changed. Okay. So I think in some sense, the blueprint for change was ready, and many people in the bureaucracy were supportive. It's true that some were not. And, Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he became a finance minister, was very aware that you needed to have the bureaucracy solidly on your side. Otherwise, it's very easy for them to undermine whatever is happening. And, in my book, Backstage, I have mentioned this incident that he called all the secretaries together. I mean, I was then Commerce Secretary, and I was working on the trade reforms that we were thinking of. And he called us all together and said, look, this is a very difficult moment for the country, and we politically have decided that we are going to make changes. And I respect the fact that some of you may have reservations. So if you are not convinced that this is the right thing to do, let me know and we'll find you another good job. So don't feel that you will be hurt by it. So I thought it was a very good, very frank way of getting the bureaucracy on board. And I think many people, and he also said that, look, we need your support, because without your active support, this thing will not work. And I think many of the people actually were very flattered by the fact that here's the finance minister saying that he wants our support in this. My guess is that the vast majority of the people by then were convinced that we needed to change. But at the political level, I mean, obviously there was opposition. I mean, politics is about opposition. So, I mean, in a democracy, democracies are adversarial forms of government. You don't expect the opposition not to oppose. Certainly, the BJP opposed it in Parliament. So the left certainly opposed it. The left actually genuinely did not approve of the reform. I have a feeling that on the BJP side, they were opposing it, but many things in the reforms they actually approved of. I would say the BJP's general concern was that getting rid of restrictions on Indian private sector business is a good thing. They had some doubts about the opening up of the economy. I think the left had reservations on both allowing the private sector a bigger role and opening up of the economy. But a very extensive process of discussion was initiated to get people on board. And I mean, we are fortunate that it worked well. I mean, the partnership between Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh, Manmohan Singh is the one who actually made the case for reforms publicly, with academics, with journalists, everything else. Mr. Rao backed those reforms. Without his backing, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. But he didn't speak out very much on them. So they divided this between themselves. But, he had extensive political connections. And I'm quite sure that he talked very frankly with opposition leaders and said, look, we're in a tough position and Manmohan Singh knows what to do. And I think we should back him. And, in a way, they did. Although the BJP created a bit of a fuss uh, on the whole, in Parliament, the reforms went through. The Congress party was by and large not ready for these reforms. I mean, but they managed to get pushed in the right direction. But there was opposition, so he promptly set up a GOM. Actually, he first sent it to the CCEA, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. There was opposition. They set up a GOM. In the GOM, I think Jairam Ramesh has mentioned, and even I think Chidambaram has confirmed that, except for Chidambaram and Manmohan Singh, there was no support. Most people thought that you are unwinding the Congress legacy. Now, I think this is parties that have been in power for a long time tend to get a bit hung up on their legacy. I mean, Deng Xiaoping uh, unraveled the Mao Zedong reform, but he never once criticized Mao Zedong, although he was responsible for basically relegating Mao Zedong to history. So, in the same kind of way, the Congress did not want to get up front and say, this is a ridiculous set of policies, we're now changing. So Jairam Ramesh was called in and he was asked to redraft the thing. And actually, what he did was he had a discussion with the Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Chidambaram, and they all agreed that all we need to do is to change the preamble. And the preamble said, we have always made changes as time was necessary. This was changed. Indiraji changed this. Rajiv ji changed this. Now we're making this change. Now, frankly, this assertion of continuity, I felt, was greatly undermining the reform because the previous changes were all marginal. This was a big change. Narasimha Rao knew that perfectly well, but when he found that his cabinet was now quite happy, I mean, they signed off on the proposals just because of the preamble, with no change in the substance whatsoever. That was a political gain. And, he didn't want to kind of go up front. I think the best story about how Narasimha Rao approached these things is the one where a journalist once asked him that, Prime Minister Rao, how come you've made a 180-degree change in your position? And PM Rao said, no, I've not changed 180 degrees. The world has changed under me. I'm still looking in the same direction. Now, that was a clever remark, but I think it's indicative also of not wanting to assert that I'm changing things. And maybe politically that was the right thing to do. But whatever it is, he managed a minority government with coalition and lots of internal sort of uncertainty in the party, and he stayed a full 5-year term and backed his finance minister solidly. My recollection of the time is that, yes, the Bombay Club had reservations, but they were positioning themselves not to say that we oppose the reforms, not to say that we should go back to what we were doing earlier, but to say that you should maybe give us more warning and take care of certain anomalies. Now, there were anomalies. I mean, let's face it. For example, if you're going to open up, then you should never have a situation where an import duty on an input is actually higher than the import duty on the final product. And there were a few such cases. These were correctly identified by Indian business, and we said, look, we'll try and take care of them. Whenever you do any big change, the details invariably present problems, and you have to fix them after a little while. But I think it was very clear that although many of them spoke up, they just wanted to be heard that, look, these things don't just happen automatically. You have to support Indian industry. And by and large, they all sat down and said, now let's see what we can do. And they did a very good job. The ones that were mutually supportive and game changing were the industrial policy reforms, which got rid of all these investment controls, combined with the trade reforms and supported by the exchange rate. In our system, these things are handled by different government, different ministries. Most people felt that we should just get rid of investment licensing and let people who want to invest expand. But if you don't get rid of import control over capital goods, letting everybody expand just means they'll all line up in order to get capital goods imports. So if you like, the queuing will take place not in the industry ministry, but in the commerce ministry. But if you liberalize capital goods, then you are genuinely achieving something. But then you have the question, if you liberalize capital goods, how do you manage the balance of payments? Well, the answer to that is you free the exchange rate. And a lot of people who think, oh, this is wonderful, I am now going to invest huge amounts and import machinery, by the time they get around to deciding it, if the exchange rate is depreciated by 25%, they find that they actually can't afford to import that machinery, so they just drop out. It's only the ones who are really serious and who can do it who would do it. So liberalizing trade simultaneously with liberalizing industry was very important. Most businessmen, by the way, did not appreciate that. I mean, most businessmen just wanted industrial controls to be liberalized, but were not very happy with the trade policy being liberalized with the free exchange rate, not realizing that, look, there's no way that we can do the one without the other. People regard the 1991 budget as a historic budget. But interestingly, the budget did not announce anything very much. The budget actually gave the rationale for industrial policy and trade policy, which had already been changed.